spoke Proto-Indo-European?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay, so sometimes the nomenclature gets a bit chewy.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily agree on the labels, but when I use Proto-Indo-European in my book, just to be clear at the beginning, I'm talking about the language that is the sort of parent of all modern living Indo-European languages. So that was one that was spoken about 5,000 years ago. And most people would agree now, I think, with the injection of this very valuable genetic data in the last decade that they were people who lived on the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Sea, and the archaeological culture that seems to best fit this story, both the linguistic evidence and the genetic evidence, is called Yamnaya, which is or Yamna in Ukrainian, but in fact the Russian term Yamnaya is the one that's most used in the literature. So it's the one I used in my book. And Yamnaya is a Russian word meaning pit grave. So it basically that culture is defined by its burial rite, and they would lay their dead out in a certain fashion under these very distinctive burial mounds called kurgans in the steppe, which are very visible because often they're the only landmarks there for miles around. And these people were honestly truly fascinating because they were the first truly nomadic herders in that part of the world. And they kind of worked out a way of life that meant that they could survive in that very hostile environment of the steppe, which is truly hostile. I mean, there's no shelter. The temperatures can go up to 40 degrees Celsius in summer and down to -40 in winter. And it's just grass and
Yeah.
there's thick snow, and there's no shelter from those Siberian winds, and there's a shortage of water in summer, and thick snow in winter. So it's a very difficult place to live, and they kind of worked out how to do it. Previously, their ancestors had basically been much more tethered to the river valleys and had only strayed out occasionally when they needed more grass and then returned to their river valleys. But these people worked out how to live all the time in the grasslands, moving with the seasons, moving with their herds. And in doing so, they essentially unlocked the huge energy reserve of the Eurasian steppe. And that meant that they underwent a huge population explosion. They were also, by the way, quite tall, and they lived quite a long time. They were well nourished, let's say. And it's this population explosion, this radiation, that pushed them out and pushed their languages with them. They also, by the way, probably had quite an expansionist mentality.
Yeah.
And we know that from sort of some of the stories and the myths that linguists have pieced together. They were fond of raiding, they were fond of, uh, they were they were not violent. They were not. I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that the languages were spread through violence, because that's been a big debate, and it doesn't look like they were anymore. But they were violent in the sense that they weren't afraid of raiding their neighbors and taking animals and women and land, and pushing out their own boundaries. So the sort of combination of these forces meant that those people moved east and west, covering over a fairly short period of time, but still nevertheless a number of generations, huge amounts of space, and the genetics corroborated that. So we can see that, the Yamnaya people went as far as the western extremity of the steppe, which is modern Hungary, but they even got as far as China in the east. And their descendants went further still. So their descendants carried their genes and their languages, we assume, to the western periphery of Europe, to Ireland, and down into the subcontinent of India and what is now Iran. So yeah, between them and their descendants, they were a fearsomely effective machine for expansion, and the same is true of their language.